into the bucket, you must fit the motor mount onto the top and the fan case seal onto the base of the motor. The motor mount can fit either of two orientations. It doesn't actually matter which way around it fits onto the motor. But just to ensure it's fitted securely. And again, when it's fitted in, the fan case seal just ensure it's secure, and that this outer lip fits all the way over the shoulder on the base of the motor. If previously removed, ensure that the exhaust grill is screwed into the top of the motor bucket, and then feed the live and neutral wires from the internal cable into the bucket and then press the grommet into place, ensuring it's adequately sealed around all edges. You can then attach the live and neutral wires to the motor. The black live wire should go to the terminal connected to the red wire on the motor. the wires are attached, you can then lower the motor bucket over the motor. But just note the detail on the mount is keyed. So one side is larger than the other. And what's important is that any wiring sits under the motor brushes. And continue pressing the bucket onto the motor until the motor mount is just flush with the bucket. With the motor fitted into the bucket, you can then firmly clip the motor inlet into the top of the bucket, just ensuring each of the 4 clips is fitted securely. Before fitting the motor bucket into the duct, it's advisable to remove the post filter lid seal from the top of the motor bucket, just to avoid any damage caused to the seal whilst fitting. And it's also very ensure before fitting the motor bucket that the two wires from the micro switch are correctly retained, and all these details here and sit under the screw boss. Before fitting the motor bucket, just feed the entire length of the internal cable into the duct, ensuring that the ribbon cable sits behind the main cable. Push it all the way down ensuring that the grommet on the end is seated securely to stop any air leaks. With the internal cable assembly located, need to position the motor bucket assembly so this detail on the side by the spindle initially locates into this cutaway detail on the side, the SMC. Once located, it's a case of firmly easing the motor bucket down into the duct, ensuring that this area here, the bleed valve fits into do need to push very firmly, but there is no danger of damaging any of the components. You can identify the motor bucket is fitted correctly within the duct, and the three screw holes align accurately with the bosses. The other area to check after fitting the motor bucket is here, where the SMC or side motor cover sits into the duct. Sometimes when you fit the motor bucket, you find that the SMC has a habit of jumping out of the duct. So just ensure at this point that these two parts are fitted tightly together. Once you're satisfied that the motor bucket is securely fitted into the duct, you can start concentrating on the wiring and PCB assembly. You should start by fitting the loom into the side of the motor bucket. Just tuck the ribbon cables carefully between the side motor cover and motor bucket the grommet into the detail in the side of the motor bucket. With the grommet in place, you should then carefully dress the ribbon cables down the side of the side motor cover and ensure that they sit under this small tab on the corner of the motor bucket. And then it should dress behind this rib here. And then the yellow wires from the micro switch should dress on the front of that same rib. Now, at this point, we only want to concentrate on the 3 ribbon cables. So I'd suggest that you just take the live and neutral wires and tuck them out of the way for now. And the same with the yellow microswitch wires. Now, there's 3 ribbon cables. You've got the 2 wide ones on the loom, and then the narrow one attached to the internal cable assembly. The narrow one should sit underneath the other 2. And at this point, you just want to lower the PCB carrier down into the rear of the duct and feed the 3 ribbon cables in this so. At this point, it's important to ensure that there's no slack in any of the ribbon cables. They should be taut and run along the length of the carrier. You now lift the carrier and the ribbon cables together back out of the duct. We would just temporarily fit in the carrier to work out where the carrier should sit in line with the ribbon cables when they were taut. Now we're satisfied that the PCB carrier is sat in the correct position in relation to the ribbon cables. We need to note that there is a retaining detail on the base of the carrier. At this point, we need to put a neat 90-degree fold in line with the tab detail. It's for this reason it was important to get the ribbon cables taut in the first place, and then the correct position in line with the carrier. Once you've fitted the crease, and just locate the ribbon cables into position. And now that they're held in position, the carrier won't move, and we can concentrate on a PCB assembly. Ensuring that you're using adequate ESD workwear. Lower the PCB into the carrier. You can then carefully attach each of the 3 ribbon cables to the correct terminals. All sized differently, so you can't fit them in correctly. And once the ribbon cables are fitted, you can fit the yellow wires from the micro switch the live and neutral wires from the internal cable, which again are sized so you can't fit them wrong. These 3 wires then tuck into this retainer on the other end of the PCB carrier. Once all wires are attached to the PCB assembly, you just need to lower the PCB carrier into the rear of the duct. But just ensure that the live neutral and micro switch wires are free of this sharp corner you should go back and neatly dress all wires. The three ribbon cables should be tucked down and sit below this tab by the rear screw boss. As previously mentioned, you should ensure that the ribbon cables sit under this tab on the corner here, and sit behind this rib. The two yellow wires, again as previously mentioned, should sit on the front of that rib, and then live and neutral wires just be tucked neatly down out of the way. Once you're satisfied that all wires are neatly dressed and free of any screw bosses, you can fit the 1 inch screw on the rear of the motor bracket. This is the only screw you can fit to this stage, because all other screws also hold in the LMC. With the screw fitted, you can then fit the LMC over the motor bucket. But if previously removed, you must remember to fit the long tube in into the side of the motor inlet first, and then neatly dress into the four retaining ribs provided. Before fitting the LMC, it's also very important to ensure that the valve arm is in the correct position. It should be pointing towards the front of the product. Failure to orientate it as shown will mean that when you come to fit the clutch cover and clean head assembly, you won't be able to, and you'll therefore need to remove all the LMC again and reposition it at that stage. If previously removed, ensure that all the parts are attached to the LMC. It's particularly important at this stage to ensure that the PCB foam mount is adequately seated in the rear of the LMC. Feed the end of the long tube in through the hole in the side of the LMC. And lower the LMC over the motor bucket. As you lower the LMC over the motor bucket, it's important to ensure that no damage is caused to the PCB assembly. And as you fit the LMC detail that sits above the U-bend cover assembly must slot into this channel. Once you're satisfied that the LMC is fitted around all edges, you can fit the 6 long 1-inch screws. With the LMC screwed in place, turn the machine over and then fit the post filter lid seal that you previously removed. Again, just ensuring that it's adequately seated in the channel all the way around. And then turn the machine around and fit the parts associated with the bleed valve. The spring first, followed by the bleed valve cap assembly, and then the bleed valve housing. Housing has some tab details just lower it into the slots and you just turn it a few degrees clockwise to lock it into position. After all those parts are fitted, you should continue fitting the clean head assembly, power cord assembly, interface PCB switch is shown in the previous sections of this film.